Hello, Curiofacts family. For the last 2 months, Taliban has been strengthening its foothold on Afghanistan and the Afghan government has been withdrawn from Afghanistan. According to the news report, Taliban has taken control of all the Afghanistan borders. Who are these people in Taliban? Where have they come from? Where does Osama bin Laden fit into the story? And why did the USA send its army to Afghanistan? Come, let's get to know about this frightening piece of history. Friends, in this video, I will start the story from 1979. In 1979, Afghanistan's president and communist leader Noor Muhammed Taraki gets murdered. After this, Soviet Union starts its interference in Afghanistan. Though Taraki was a communist leader, but he was murdered by a fellow communist leader, Hafizullah Amin. Hafizullah first arrested Taraki and then murdered him. The communist parties in Afghanistan were divided into two factions and there was a lot of infighting between them. Taraki wasn't completely innocent. He had tried to murder Hafizullah Amin. While the infighting between the communists was going on, but at the same time the communists and Islamists were also at war with each other in Afghanistan at this point. Around this time in 1979, a revolution took place in Afghanistan's neighbor Iran. That is known as the 1979 Iran Revolution. Actually, the situation in Iran at this time was quite a bit similar to the situation in Afghanistan. There were Islamists on one side and leftists and communists on the other hand. Iran's king Mohammad Reza believed in modernism and secularism, and he brought a lot of economic development for his country along with secularism, but at the same time, because of his greed, he had the protesters in the opposition murdered, the voices of opposition were quashed, political parties were outlawed, and the parliament was dismissed. For these reasons, a revolution against him took place, and in 1979, the Islamists took over Iran. Watching this happen in Iran, in Afghanistan, Hafizullah Amin, who was a communist, was worried about an Islamist takeover in Afghanistan. To avoid this, he thought he needed to appease the religious conservative people. For this, he started constructing mosques, started including the name of Allah in his speeches, and distributes copies of the Quran. All this despite being a communist, because he was trying to somehow get the Islamists to his side as well. But people didn't like him at all. He committed many atrocities against the people of Afghanistan. He is actually considered to be a semi-psychopath in Afghanistan. You would notice an interesting thing here, friends. All these leaders, Hafizullah Amin, Taraki and Mohammad Reza, whatever ideology they may portray to the world, there lies a deep greed of power in all of them. In their greed for power, they can twist their ideologies to any extent. It's something that's there even in the political leaders today, regardless of the political party they belong to. It's still seen dictators can make up any excuse to remain in power. It was also seen in the Soviet Union when Lenin lost power. Stalin had his opponent murdered to get power. What happened next was that in December 1979, before the Islamists could take over Afghanistan, the Soviet Union intervened by sending its forces. The Soviet Union then had Hafizullah Amin murdered. There was an ideological reason for it as well as a geopolitical reason. The geological reason was that the ideology of communism was losing ground in Afghanistan and was being misrepresented by Hafizullah Amin. So the Soviet Union wanted to lend its support to the real communism ideology. The geopolitical reason was that there was the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the USA. If the Soviet Union could gain influence in Afghanistan, then another country could come under the influence of the Soviet Union. It would have benefited the Soviet Union in the fight against the USA. After killing Hafizullah Amin, Barbak was installed as the new head of government. He was also a leader of the Saur Revolution. After coming into power, he had more than 2,700 political prisoners released. He replaced the red communist flag with a new one. He promised to bring in a new constitution of Afghanistan. Apart from this, free election, freedom of speech, right to protest and freedom of religion were also promised. Finally, it seemed like there would be peace in Afghanistan and Afghanistan would move in the right direction. But how could the USA have silently watched Afghanistan progress? The USA could see that the Soviet Union had established its influence in Afghanistan. Even in the countries like Vietnam and Ethiopia, the Soviet Union had humiliated America. America was a step below the Soviet Union in this war. America decided to use Afghanistan as an opportunity to take its revenge against the Soviet Union. How could they take revenge? America took this revenge by supporting the opposition ideology, mujahideen, in Afghanistan. Countries like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia were already supporting the Islamist mujahideen in Afghanistan, and America joined them in doing so. The CIA conducted its largest ever secret operation to do this. They named it Operation Cyclone. CIA Director Robert Gates had confessed it later. However, then US President Jimmy Carter had authorized a secret aid of $500,000 to be given in the Mujahideen on 3rd July 1979. Even after the change in power in the US, millions of dollars were given to the Mujahideen. It was happening even after Ronald Reagan came into power. Look at this photo. Reagan is with Mujahideen, along with America's CIA, Pakistan's ISI, British secret agency M16, and Saudi Arabia was also supporting Islamist Mujahideen. Who were these Mujahideens? Initially, they were only guerrilla fighters that fought while hiding in the mountains. But after getting so much support, not only did they have weapons, not only guns, but even anti-aircraft missiles were also available to them. That's when the Soviet Union started feeling the effects of the fight. In 1988, Afghanistan's president was Muhammad Najibullah. He signs the Geneva Accord with Pakistan. It's basically a peace agreement that neither country will interfere in the affairs of the other country. The guarantors of the peace were the Soviet Union and the USA. The USA promised that if the Soviet Union withdraws its armies from Afghanistan, then the USA would stop supplying weapons to the Mujahideen. Finally, after 9 years in February 1989, the Soviet Union withdraws its army from Afghanistan. The Soviet Union leaves Afghanistan, and there was many reasons for it. The Soviet Union was breaking up into pieces. The Soviet Union then get divided into multiple countries, and Russia became a major country among them. That's a separate story. We should focus on Afghanistan. Najibullah tries his best to end this conflict. He reduces his powers. In 1987, a new constitution is brought in for Afghanistan. Afghanistan would cease to be a one-party state like the other communist countries of the time. The other parties could contest elections as well. In 1988, new parliamentary elections are conducted, and Najibullah's party, the PDPA, wins the election, and Najibullah retains his power. In 1990, Afghanistan is declared to be an Islamic republic. All references to communism is removed. Najibullah tried to appease the religious conservative people in the country so that there could be peace in the country. Najibullah also tries to get foreign aid into Afghanistan and to start private investment, but despite doing so much, America continues to supply weapons to the Mujahideen, and Mujahideen group does not step back even a bit. They boycott the elections, and even after everything, they think that Islam was still in danger. This civil war continues. The Soviet Union tries to help Najibullah by sending foreign aid, but that doesn't help because in 1991, the Soviet Union breaks apart itself, like I told you. And in 1992, Mujahideen wins the civil war. Though Mujahideen was an Islamist group, but it was made up of people from various ethnicities, and in it too there were many people greedy for power. When fighting begins in the Mujahideen group for power, finally in 1992 a person comes into power. He becomes the new leader of the Islamic State of Afghanistan. His name was Burhanuddin Rabbani. By the next few years, a new enemy had risen called the Taliban. In 1996, Taliban removes the Islamist Mujahideen leader from power, who are the Taliban. In the Pashto language, Taliban means student. Initially, the leader of this Taliban group was Mullah Umar. He formed this group with 50 students. But with time, some refugees returned to Afghanistan from Pakistan. They later became the part of this group. These people were even more religious extremists, even more extremely right-wing people compared to the mujahideen as well. These Afghan refugees had apparently learned this extremism in some schools of Pakistan, but their religion was not the only thing involved. As I said, there are many factions of ethnic groups in the mujahideen. Taliban also believed in the ideology of Pashtun nationalism in addition to being Islamists. Pakistan and Saudi Arabia supported the Taliban, and it is said that America created Taliban. If you look at it technically, friends, this isn't true, but practically there is some weightage to this argument because America basically tried its best. All the effort of bringing democracy into Afghanistan were all ruined by supplying weapons to the Mujahideen, and an environment was created that enabled the birth of Taliban. Not only weapons, but America apparently spent millions of dollars in printing textbooks in Afghanistan. These books were filled with violent images and used to promote the extremist ideology. Later, these books funded by America were used by the Taliban. By September 96, Taliban had successfully captured Kabul and establishes the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. In the beginning of the common people were supportive of the Taliban because they could finally expect some stability in the country. The fight going on for so many years was at end, and in the beginning the Taliban did indeed make some areas peaceful, but with the time the conservative ideology of Taliban came to the forefront and common people get a glimpse of it. Taliban bans a lot of things in Afghanistan. The list of banned items is so long that your eyes will pop out after seeing the things banned by Taliban. Cinema, television, music, VCR, football, chess, kite flying, most of paintings, photography, embroidery on sleeves, clean shave, foreigners, UN offices, NGOs, education for girls aged about 10 years. Under Taliban rule, men had to compulsorily keep a beard and women had to keep their bodies covered in burqas. Women couldn't leave their homes without being accompanied by a male relative, and because Taliban believed in the ideology of Pashtun ideology, the non-Pashtun ethnicities become victims of ethnic cleansing. Thousands of Muslims were killed, Christians get prosecuted, Hindus are given badges so they can be distinguished from the Muslims. A very important part of Afghanistan's cultural history were statues of Buddha. Those were destroyed by Taliban. Obviously, former President Najibullah is also murdered by them. People and governments from around the world criticized Taliban after seeing all of these happen, and they were quite vocal with the criticism. But there were three countries that recognized Taliban as a legitimate government. Then the three countries were Pakistan, UAE, and Saudi Arabia. In the late 1990s, some Mujahideen forces tried to fight the Taliban. These are known as the Northern Alliance. Ahmad Shah Massoud was their head. But in 2001, the Northern Alliance loses this fight and Ahmad Shah Massoud gets killed as well. Only 2 days after it happened, a terrorist group Al-Qaeda conducts the 9/11 attacks in USA. An attack that changed the entire world. The leader of Al-Qaeda at that time was a Saudi terrorist, Osama bin Laden. Taliban helped to shelter Osama bin Laden, giving him safe harbor in their country. Osama bin Laden writes a letter to America in which he writes that the 9/11 attacks were a revenge for what America was doing in countries like Somalia, Libya, and Afghanistan. He gives a justification by saying that America was committing war crimes against Muslims in those countries. He gives a justification by saying that America was committing war crimes against Muslims in those countries. So they took a revenge against America by carrying out the 9/11 attacks. It makes America want to take revenge for the 9/11 attacks. So America sends its forces to Afghanistan. USA then conducts airstrikes on Afghanistan at places where they think terrorist groups are hiding. But obviously, if airstrikes are conducted, then some civilians would also get killed. It wouldn't happen that when bombs would be dropped and only the terrorists would die. But with the support of the Mujahideens, Northern Alliance, by December 2001, Taliban is totally pushed back by the USA. Ahmad Shah Massoud's aide, Hamid Karzai, becomes new president of Afghanistan's interim government. In 2004, a new constitution is adopted in Afghanistan yet again. Elections take place and more than 6 million Afghan votes in this election. Karzai wins the election and becomes the new president of Afghanistan. He establishes some good relations with India. Afghanistan and India's relations became quite strong at that time. On the other hand, the USA conducts bombing and airstrikes in Pakistan to eliminate the hideouts of Taliban there. In 2011, Osama bin Laden was killed by the US forces. In 2015, it is found that Mullah Omar, the first and original leader of the Taliban, had died in 2013 due to illness. During all this, the US had dispatched its army to Afghanistan to maintain peace and to keep Taliban in check. Additionally, as a support to the new democratic government in Afghanistan, but even after years, Taliban is still not wiped out. The group keeps popping up at different places. In different areas of Afghanistan and neighboring countries, Taliban conducts shootouts and bombings in which hundreds of civilians are killed. In February 2020, while Donald Trump was the president of USA, shockingly he starts peace talk with Taliban, meaning that the US government starts dialogue with the Taliban. They say if Taliban cuts off its relation with terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, then USA will withdraw its forces and will leave Afghanistan. Because the US forces in Afghanistan required a lot of fundings, as I said, more than $2 trillion were spent and Americans were against it too. The Americans questioned why they were fighting a war that wasn't theirs. They were in a country for 20 years where their people, their soldiers were getting killed and they weren't even getting anything from it. In 2021, Taliban is the most powerful it had ever been. More than 85,000 fighters are fighting for Taliban. Now when Joe Biden is the president of US, he continues with Donald Trump's policy and decides to withdraw the American troops from Afghanistan, especially before the 20th anniversary of 9/11. US says that it's not their concern, they would get their troops out of the place. Many people say that if the purpose of US for staying in Afghanistan was a revenge, then after Osama bin Laden was killed in 2011, why did US let its troops to be in Afghanistan then? Why didn't they withdraw their army then? On the other hand, if United States' purpose of staying in Afghanistan was to make Afghanistan a democratic country and to end Taliban, then that purpose hasn't been accomplished even a bit. US has completely failed in this aspect because Taliban is in power again and is at its strongest right now. Joe Biden says that though he doesn't trust the Taliban, but the 300,000 soldiers of the American army can easily counter 85,000 Taliban fighters. But the ground reality isn't so. As I said, nowadays it's been said that 100% of the borders of Afghanistan is under the Taliban's control. And Afghanistan government is overthrown now. Now as Taliban rule has returned to Afghanistan, then it could be terrible for Pakistan. And why is that? Wait for our next episode for that. If you liked our video, do hit the thumbs up button and click on the subscribe button. Thank you.